Hey, what's up? And welcome to the 2014 Sit and Go Boot Camp. Pretty pumped for it. Looks like you guys are pretty pumped for it as well. Had a real nice turnout for this year's session. Got about a hundred or so registered, so that's awesome. You're in for some pretty good stuff over the next four sessions. And what I want to do first is, before even jumping into session one, is preface this session first and say that this is actually a re-recording. On Wednesday, January 8th, we held the live session. It was recorded, however, due to my technical skills or lack thereof, there was an issue with the recording. However, what I've decided to do is just go ahead and re-record that presentation. No content will be lost. And also, you'll see here on the right-hand side of the screen that this is the chat log. I saved the chat log. There were a lot of really good questions during the session, so obviously I wanted to make sure that those questions remained in this re-recording. So you'll see the chat log there. I'll go through that. I will go through that and answer those questions and during this recording, during this presentation, so that if you're seeing this for the first time and you weren't there for the live session, you do not miss any of the conversation that we've all had. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. And what I first want to say is, in terms of what you can expect from this course, from the next four sessions, I'm going to talk about what the course is and what it isn't. What it isn't is how to beat sit and goes, how to play sit and goes, I should say. We're definitely going to talk about how to beat them, but we're not going to talk about how to play sit and goes. We're not going to talk about the basics. That's not what this is about. What this is about is adding in some new plays that are very rarely taught out there that can have you beating the games better than other players who might be using those basic ABC strategies that are typically taught on books, forums, strategy sites, whatever they may be. Because essentially what has happened over the years is that, just like anything in the world, things evolve. And sit and goes in particular have evolved as well. Just naturally, people are getting better at these games. There's more information out there, which is great. It's great that there's so much information out there to help players get into online poker, potentially make it a career. And that's something that's occurring more and more every single day. People are looking to online poker and sit and go specifically as their career choice. And it could be a great career choice. But on the flip side, with all that information out there, like I said, players are getting better. And just overall, there's more better players out there. So accordingly, the games have gotten a little bit tougher. And just to kind of give you a little bit of background on this course as well, back in 2012 is probably when I first ran this type of boot camp where I introduced some new strategies. And in regards to 2012 and its significance, if you think about late 2012 when that occurred in the grand scheme of things in regards to online poker, 2011, April 2011, is when the U.S. Left the market, certainly not by choice. But what that meant was a huge population of the online poker marketplace was gone now. I'm not sure if these numbers are correct. I remember reading somewhere that there was about, at one point, 17 million online poker players, whether it's just registered, active, whatever that number is, 17 million. 10 million of which were from the United States. So if we were to take the assumption that 80% or so of online poker players are losing players, that's a lot of losing players. It's a lot of fish that are no longer at the tables anymore, and that's just a fact. So you combine the fact that you took out a lot of players from the player pool that weren't very good, and combine that with the fact that there's more information out there than ever, players are getting better. What that's made is an environment where the games are just a little bit tougher. The micro stakes games, the small stakes games, sure, they're certainly still beatable. You're still going to find those players that aren't that great. But as you move up stakes, and we always consider high stakes games as being really tough. What we're going to be discussing here is, and my frame of reference is typically at the 30 and I guess you could say under $60, or most of my experience is under $30 games, $15 to $30 games. But I'm working with a lot of $60 players, $100 players. Um, but those games, those mid stakes games, as you go through the $7 games, $15 games, or for you 180 man guys, the three rebuys, the $8 180s, those games are getting very reg infested. And for some new people that are new to sit and goes that are in this session right now who are watching this, when I say reg, what a reg means is a regular winning player, guys that are playing every single day, that are profitable and winning. So that's what a reg means. And so in 2012, about a year after Black Friday for the poker world, it's when we really started to see games get a little bit tougher. My biggest frame of reference, or maybe not biggest frame of reference, but I've played all sorts of sit and goes. I played all types from 6 max to the rush on demands at full tilt and everywhere in between. Probably the most games I played are the 18 mans. And in particular on PokerStars, I saw the 18-man games definitely getting tougher. ROIs were decreasing across the board. Graphs were flatlining. People were just not having great results. And I remember about a year or so ago, there was so much talk about, oh my God, the games are dead. There's no more money to be made anymore, and nothing can be further from the truth. However, there was some validity to that comment in the sense that games were getting harder, but you need to adapt to those games, and that's why the course was developed in 2012, because I started to work with some other top players and learning new strategies and developing new strategies to get an edge of the other players who might be playing that tried and true strategy that maybe we've all learned when getting started. So 2012 introduced a 5-session boot camp. In 2013, over this past year, I updated it. I add some new content, new videos to that previous boot camp. And now in 2014, we're coming back, providing more updates. And for those that have seen this boot camp before, who have seen my previous 5-part series, there will be some duplicate information. You will have seen some of the same slides, some of the same information. But what I wanted to do was obviously add in some new information, add some updates, but really one of the focuses of this course, especially for those that have already seen it, is to help you implement these strategies better, so that you're not struggling as much. So now that we're about a year and a half, 2 years removed from the introduction of some of these strategies, I've gotten to see obviously what works and what players are having a tough time with. And when I was running this session before, I talked a lot about the do's. Here's what you want to do this, do that, here's why you want to do this. And that made sense, and some people got it, and other players had a hard time implementing it. Because one of the biggest issues that I saw over the years is that sometimes people don't know when not to do it. They don't know when to stop using some of these strategies. And that's what I'm going to integrate more into these sessions, as well as here's when you should use them, here's when you should not use them. Because what I'm going to talk about is not necessarily as a whole new way to play sit and goes. This course isn't going to say you need to stop everything you're doing, change everything you're doing, this is the way you need to play from now on. What I'm going to be introducing are some new strategies that you can implement into your game that you're playing already. So if you're a winning player already, you're obviously not going to stop everything you're doing. You're going to be adding some of these plays in. These are essentially tools to add into the toolbox, in regards to making your life a little bit easier, having more control over your game, increasing your ROI, and producing more profits, of course. So that's what this is. And right before the live session, a question that I was asked was, what game type does this apply to? Is this a 6 max? Is this 180s? What is it? And my short answer is it applies to all game types. And usually when people hear that, it's say, how can a sit and go strategy video or course apply to all game types? Because each game type is different in their own regards, whether it's ICM or game flow, whatever it may be. Here's why it applies to all game types. It applies to all game types because we're going to be talking about exploiting players, exploiting situations that occur in each game that you play, no matter whether it's 6 max through 180 mans. really this course is just not for hyper turbo satellites where it's just push fold, push fold, push fold right from the beginning. So it's not for that game type, and it's really not for heads up sit and goes. I never really played any heads up sit and goes, so I have no frame of reference there. But from 6 max through 180 man, it's more of your standard sit and goes or multi table sit and goes. Um, it applies to those. And I asked the question. I said, "Hey guys, type in what games you're playing." And this occurs in every session that I run, and I know that it's not an issue. But you'll see here, 180 mans, 180 mans, 50-50s, 180s, 18s, 9 max, 9 man KO, 6 max, 6 max, 6 max, stud, 7 card stud. Granted, I don't have a whole lot of 7 card stud experience, but this has to do about exploiting players. So no matter what game you're playing, no matter what format, these strategies will apply because the situations that we're going to discuss, especially the one in part two of today, part two of this session, um, it's a situation that occurs in every single game of every day that you play. And it's something that's so overlooked that you're just leaving money on the table if you're not recognizing it. So that's what we're going to get into in part two. Part one here, what we're going to do is start talking about optimal play, what that looks like, get everything set up. We have to get the HUD set up and start introducing some of these strategies, but also take a look at the old strategies, what that type of gameplay looks like, because essentially we want to know how everybody else is playing, and maybe you're playing that way already. It's certainly how I started with the ABC, sit and go strategy. Um, we want to know what that strategy looks like so that we can exploit it. We want to take advantage of those players. And that's the other thing. While everybody out there is certainly getting better on the whole, because there's so much information out there, this course is actually to beat up on those players because these strategies are designed to get an edge, even more of an edge over those players. So if you feel that the games are getting tougher, if you've seen your ROI shrink, if your graph isn't going in the right direction or it's flatlined, hopefully these strategies can be injected right into your game. Even right after this session, one of the strategies that you're going to learn here can be tossed right into your game right away and hopefully help you get more confidence, more control over your game. So in in part one of session one, we're going to start talking about that. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. All right. So as I said in this particular session, what we're going to do in the first part is review the old style of sit and go play. And then we're obviously going to jump right into some of the new strategies, the new concepts, the new way to think about games. And that's another thing, guys. You're going to be thinking so much more at the table. I'll talk a little bit more about this in part two, but you're going to be thinking so much more. I think a lot of us have become so accustomed to more of a robotic style of play that the thinking aspect of sit and goes has kind of been lost among many of us. So we're going to be thinking a whole lot more, and that's what these strategies are going to help you do. And before we jump into the nuts and bolts of the actual strategies, we need to get Holdem Manager, Poker Tracker, whatever you're using. We need to get your HUD set up. For a long time, I actually played without a HUD. That was back in 2010, 2011, when the games, quite frankly, were a little bit easier. I still took tons of notes. I guess you could say I had my own little HUD in the sense that I just took tons and tons of notes and color coding, and that was the way for me to get information on players. Essentially, the more information you have, the better, and that's what we're after. But with the games getting to the point of where they are, you need a HUD. If you want to exploit players, if you want to use these strategies, you need to use a HUD. Most people know me as a staker. Myself and the partners with Global Staking, we're staking a lot of players. At any given time, it would be 70, 80 players that we're staking. At the moment, when we're going through applications, we don't even accept players really anymore who are not using a HUD. If you say you're not using a HUD, even if you've had some winning results, we're just passing because we know that doesn't produce long-term success. The games aren't really going to get much easier moving forward. Some of the strategies we're going to discuss here will probably need to be evolved and adapted in a year or two from now, and that's exactly what I'm here to do as well. If that's the case, we'll start looking at the games, and I'll produce another sit and go course, and we'll talk about some new stuff. Maybe people start using this as their ABC strategy, what I'm going to talk about today, and we'll figure out a way to exploit that. So it's always evolving and changing. The most important thing that you can do, though, is adapt, and evolve with those changes so you can stay ahead of the game and not be left behind. Um, and then at the tail end of part one here, we're going to talk about note taking and obviously the importance of that. So um, let's um, let's start talking about what the old style sit and go play looks like. And let me scroll down here for a second because I started asking some questions. Um, the old style. This is how most of us learned. Most books produce this type of information, strategy articles, early videos, in terms of if you're just starting in sit and goes, and if you want to beat sit and goes, here's what you need to do. You need to play very tight early on, 10, 20, 15, 30 blind level. You're only playing premium hands. Um, in the mid game, as the blinds start to increase, you just start stealing those blinds, but still only stick to really good hands to open up and steal with. And actually later on, I'll show you a little chart that I grabbed from a strategy article about what hands you should be playing in the mid game to open up, to re-raise, and it told you exactly what you're technically supposed to do. And I know for a fact that article has been, or that PDF guide has been read by thousands and thousands of players, and I'm sure they're using that. Um, and then another belief, and this isn't necessarily untrue, but I think there's a better way to play in that. Um, it's been preached for a while, and this is especially for single table games, 18-man games, maybe not necessarily for 180 mans, as the bubble doesn't mean a whole lot. But there was the belief that, still is the belief, that all your profits are really made from the bubble. That if you just don't screw up in the beginning and you get to the end game, you get to the bubble, and you just play a perfect push fold game, that's where all your profits are made. And there's some validity to that, right? You can't win a game, in the first blind level, but you can certainly lose one. So yes, you don't want to screw up, but with that being said, there's more to the game than just folding your way or playing a couple hands to get to the bubble and then just playing a perfect push fold game. Because if the games are getting a little bit more difficult, that means that other players are understanding ranges. They understand the push fold game as well. They understand ICM and the ranges that are appropriate when dealing with some ICM tax. So are you going to have an edge if you're playing against another player and you're just playing push fold, push fold, push fold, and they understand what proper ranges you're shoving and what they should be shoving? That's not where your edge comes from. Where your edge comes from is by simply having more chips to them. That's easier said than done, but that's the point of this course, is to develop exploitable strategies to have you build in your stack so you can actually avoid that push fold game for as long as possible, and have more control again over your game. So instead of pushing all in to steal the blinds, we can raise two big blinds and steal, so risking less to win the same amount. Um, it's always been discussed that there's very minimal post flop play in sit and goes, and that's still the case to a point. But some of these strategies will naturally having you get involved in some more post flop play. So it's important that you actually learn proper post flop play so that you're not leaking chips that way either. Um, the other thing that is often taught is that as soon as you get to the 10 big blind area, 11 big blinds, 10 big blinds, 9 big blinds, all you can ever do is just shove all in. Um, we're in session 2, not part 2 of today, but in the next session, um, I'm going to talk about the concept of raising versus shoving, and that, quite frankly, we can do some more stuff in the right scenarios instead of just shove all in with 10 big blinds. So, but that is a very commonly held belief, and even to this day when I talk to people about this, I say, hey, maybe you could raise with 10 big blinds, and that might sound crazy right now, raise and potentially fold. That might sound crazy. I'll show you why that is the case in an upcoming session. But this is still what most players are doing, and quite frankly, it's not the most profitable. It might be plus EV, but it's not the most profitable, and that's what we're going after for. We're not going after a plus EV game. We're going after the optimal, most profitable game. And you're going to hear me say optimal and exploitable and unexploitable a whole lot, so I'm going to sound like a broken record, but that's what we need to get really hardwired into our brains is optimal play. There's a 2-to-1 rule. If you're getting 2-to-1 odds, you have to call. We'll talk about that in future sessions. That's not always the case. And then the old style, what's taught out there, because many times people are teaching to the masses, whether it's in a video or a book, it's hard to talk about exploitable play because exploitable plays means you're exploiting player tendencies. So the easier way to teach is to provide unexploitable strategies where if you just do X, you just do this, it'll produce profitable results. But what I started to question was, okay, that might be the case. This style might be profitable. Is it the most profitable, or could I be doing something better? Could I be making more money with my plays? Um, and so many of you are probably familiar with ICM calculators and Nash equilibrium charts. And Nash equilibrium charts in particular are obviously promoting an unexploitable strategy because they're charts, and especially for you 180 man guys, you're probably using these types of charts as they're very popular. They say you have 12 big blinds from middle position, here's the hands that you should shove, and you follow that. Now, if you have no idea about ranges, then yeah, you probably need that chart to get you on the right path, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but that's not to say that there's not a better way to play. Um, and Sit and Go Wizard, and I knew the new popular ICM calculators, ICMizer. Um, what people typically do is they pop in a hand. They say, hey, should I push or fold? Is it profitable? Is it pumping out a plus EV, a dollar plus EV number, or a plus chip EV number, and they go on their way, yes or no, and they say, okay, it was profitable, and they go on their way. Again, my question is, can we do something that's more profitable and actually outperform some of the calculations that these ICM calculators put out there? And guys, I also want to mention that as we go through here, and I'm going to talk about guys playing the ABC basic old sit and go style. I don't want to put down this style because one, it's a profitable one, and two, it's certainly how I learn and how many players learn, and three, you're not going to stop using many of these strategies. It's just that it's important now to integrate some new ones into this strategy. And the strategy and the gameplay that you're going to be using on a daily basis in your games needs to be dependent upon the players and the table that you're at. And that's a key aspect because this unexploitable, this old style, kind of neglected to a point who you're playing against. They just said, make this play and it's probably going to be fine. Um, and what we're going to say is, depending on the player, you should make this play, you should make play A or play B. And that's usually what you're going to have an option of, play A or play B, unexploitable or exploitable. And that's what I'm going to talk about as to when to use which strategy. So new and improved play, and obviously that's what we're here to talk about. We're going to change from being totally 100% unexploitable to start including some exploitable play. And knowing when and why to deviate, as I just said, from play A or play B, and A, whatever you want to call it, A or B, knowing when and why to deviate from unexploitable to exploitable and jump back and forth, that's how you become an optimal player. That's optimal play. That's the most profitable play. That's when the games really become fun. It is kind of like a game in itself of, okay, which play should I use? Should I use this one, or should I use the play that's in column A or the play that's in column B? So that's what we're going to discuss here. And that's also an update to this course as well. Before, a lot of what I talked about was, here's your exploitable strategies, just go ahead and integrate them. What we're going to talk about here is, yes, here's your exploitable plays, but here's some times where you shouldn't use them. Here's some times where you should. And I think it'll be nice to see some real hand history examples to illustrate that. And what a lot of this new improved play is really designed to attack. It's designed to attack those other players using those basic strategies that are still playing the ABC game. RC and RF, that means raise call and raise fold. We're going to look to do more raising instead of just pushing or folding all in. So that if you take me versus another guy, I'm going to be raising to try to steal a pot more often. So what does that mean? If I min raise, I'm risking 2 big blinds to win the pot, whereas many other guys are risking their entire stack to win the same pot. So in the right situations, the raise can be much more profitable than the all-in shove. While we're going to talk a lot about regs because they're quite frankly the ones that are making the games a little bit more difficult, and there's obviously good regs, there's mediocre regs, good regs, really good regs. We'll talk about kind of each one and how to deal with them. But they're certainly the ones making the games more difficult. So those are the ones that we need to exploit and not be afraid of when we're at a table with them. If you're playing a $15 18 man, there might be 12 regs in that game. That doesn't mean you can't register for it. Don't be afraid of that game because that might be all you get. It's best to know, okay, how can I get an edge over these guys so that I don't see my ROI drop, I don't lose my edge, I don't lose my profits in these games. But we're also going to talk a little bit more about maximizing value against the random fishy players. I'll call losing players randoms sometimes. I'll call them fish. It's not to degrade them or anything like that. It's just, quite frankly, there are winning players and there are losing players. The losing players play, they can do all sorts of wacky stuff. That's what's making them losing players. So we need to figure out, though, they can also sometimes make life difficult because they do a lot of wacky stuff that can really throw you off. So there are some things that we can do to maximize our value against them, how to put ourselves in position to extract chips from them that also will then make it easier to play against the regs, because if you can put yourself in position to take the chips of a losing player before those chips go to somebody else, that's a good thing as well. Remember what I always keep in the back of your mind: the way to have an edge and the way to play a lower variance, higher ROI game is to simply have more chips at all stages. And that's what we're going to talk about: is to build your stack so that you finish in the money more and you hopefully finish in first place more. So we'll talk about building pots and just stealing them, isolating fish, building pots against them. Put yourself in position to where you can just grab some chips off of them at every single stage starting from 10-20. Utilizing post swap play for more value. We'll talk a little bit about double and triple barreling in I think it's in the third session. Post swap play is still not something that is extensive in sit and goes, but like I said, you'll see some of the strategies I discussed will naturally have you a little bit more involved in post flop play. So you need to make sure that, quite frankly, you're not screwing up when you get to post flop. You might be doing everything right pre flop, but if you stink post flop and you don't know how to when to c bet, when to double barrel, when to check raise, whatever, that could be hurting you as well. So we need to make sure that if you are getting involved in post flop situations, that you are playing accordingly, maximizing your value or minimizing the amount of chips that you lose as well. And you'll see here playing optimal versus plus EV. Everybody talks about making a plus EV play, a plus EV play. Well, what's the most plus EV play? And that's what we're after. The most plus EV is probably the optimal play. So that's what we're going for. And as I said, in determining what the optimal play is, we're going to outperform those guys that are just plopping a hand in, their ICM calculator, seeing, oh, is this profitable? Yep. Well, we're going to take that one step further and see, can we do something that's more profitable? So that's where we're headed, guys. And this again is something in regards to like a teaching aspect. We all have our automatic plays, right? You pick up ace king in middle position with 15 big blinds, you should raise. When you pick up pocket sevens at 10-20 and a guy from under the gun raises and you're on the button, you know that you should probably call with your pocket pair to try to hit a set. It doesn't cost you a lot, and you're obviously hoping to hit a set and take the guy's entire stack. So set mining at the early stages is an automatic play, right? We all have those automatic plays that, without even thinking, this kind of promotes the robotic style. Without even thinking, we make certain plays through every game. Well, my goal is to get you to incorporate these new strategies so that they become automatic. When I'm working with guys where I'm talking about these strategies and they understand these strategies, and I say, hey, why did you miss this spot? This is a great spot. They're like, oh, I didn't have time to think about it. And yet, while I agree that initially there's going to be a learning curve, you're going to be thinking a whole lot more, and you will have to probably drop tables, and I'll talk about the aspect of dropping tables. I want these plays now to become automatic so that when you see a certain situation come up, the automatic play that pops in your head is one of these exploitable strategies. And I kind of forgot to go over here into the chat. You'll see all these ones here. You're like, why the hell everybody type a one in? What I asked was, if you go back to, I'm about two slides ahead. I said, who recognizes this style? Who's playing this style? Who's seen this in a video? And I said, just type a one in there if you've seen it. And everybody was typing ones. I said, type a two if you don't, if you think that that's not the basic strategy. And obviously everybody agrees. It's not something that's a secret. It's what's out there. It's what's permeating throughout the internet and in books. So everybody certainly agrees. But in regards to exploiting those ABC strategies, the new exploitable plays need to become automatic as well. So if you want them to become automatic, you need to buy in. After you're done seeing this course, you're probably going to raise your eyebrow once or twice as I'm going through and saying, does that really work? Is this really a good play? I'm going to show you math to back it up. It doesn't mean you do math or the games. Don't worry, I'm not going to freak you out with any difficult calculations that only a math whiz can figure out. But I will be using some calculators to just prove to you so that you can have faith in the play. So once you believe and have faith, that's step one. that you believe in. And once you know you believe in it and you know why it works, then you start implementing it and recognizing the situations. And the players that have been able to do that have really seen their ROI go through the roof. Um, the players that I've worked with that are bought into this are some of the top players now, in the game. Some people have seen some of the before and after graphs that I've posted on the website. Um, those speak for themselves, and it's so awesome to see players uh, see these strategies work for them. And I know that they're going to work for them. I know that they're going to buy in because they work for me. Um, some of these strategies were introduced to me by another top reg who had the highest ROI in 18-man sit and goes. Now he's moved on to 180s. And I was wondering, I was like, why does he have such a high ROI? So we started talking, and we started discussing some of these new plays, and coming up with my own as well. When I saw my own 18-man ROI go from 12% to 16%. My 9-man ROI is now at around 10%. My 6-max ROI is at 12%. Those are well above average of what other regs are doing. And it's simply because I bought into these strategies. They made sense. I've done extensive calculations. I've gone through tons and tons of hand history reviews. I've worked with hundreds of players that I've staked and coached, and obviously on my own game. And this stuff works. When it doesn't work, it's either when you don't buy in or you kind of go at it half-hearted, where, okay, I'll do it here, but I won't do it here, or you feel like you can't apply them correctly, then you won't see the results. And that's really not to scare anybody, but it's the fact of the matter is that if you don't buy in, this isn't going to be the easiest thing in the world to implement because, for one, you probably learned one way for a while, and I'm trying to tell you, hey, you can do it a different way. Changing those habits is always going to be a process. But the important part is go through that process, work on the game, believe in it, and after a couple weeks, a month, whatever, however long it takes you, then you can really start flying high with some of these strategies. And if you don't believe in them, then that's fine. You can still keep playing the basic strategy. You will probably be profitable, but I want to be the most profitable player. I want the players that I'm working with to be the most profitable in their games. When some guy comes to me and says, I work with a lot of 18-man guys, and when somebody says I have an 8% ROI in my 18-man games, I go, why isn't it 12%? Why isn't it 13%? That's the questions that I'm asking players, and they say, well, I don't know. Well, that's why we're trying to implement these types of strategies. And I've worked with some of the top 180-man guys that have 6 figures in profits, and they still, they're always looking for that extra edge to say, how can I increase my ROI by 1%, which means a lot over thousands and thousands of games. How can I increase my ROI by 1%, 2%? How can I minimize my downswings? Well, some of these strategies have been injected into their games as well, and it's making their life easier. So, and somebody asked in here, I wasn't sure how far into the session they asked it. I think it might have been in the second part of today. But is this for high stakes, low stakes? It's for all stakes. It's about exploiting players, which applies to all stakes. Typically, at your lower stakes, micro stakes games, you're going to have more of the fishier players, random players, so that that basic ABC style is probably the best because that's what that was always built for. Was for against players that really didn't know what they were doing back in 2005, 6, 7, 2008. And you still have that type of dynamic in those really micro stakes games. But as you get to the $7 games, the $15 games, more players understand what's going on, and that's where these strategies really apply. And I'm working with players up to $100 sit and goes that I'm helping with some of these strategies and it's working great in their games. So if you're playing kind of anywhere in between, these strategies will work. So, but before we get into the strategies, we need to set up our HUD and set up our software. So let me pop up my Holdem Manager. You'll see here's this Holdem Manager 1. I got to switch over to Holdem Manager 2. I have 2. I've kind of been reluctant to jump over to 2 just because it seems like such a pain to do normal, easy stuff with sit and goes. Holdem Manager 1 I just found is a little bit easier. But I know a lot of guys are using Holdem Manager 2, so I think it's only appropriate that I switch over soon. So I'll probably be making a videos in the future here using more of Holdem Manager 2. But for our purposes here today, it doesn't really matter what I'm using. I'm just going to be talking about the HUD stats, which you can integrate no matter whether you're using Poker Tracker or Holdem Manager 2 or whatever. And in the in the forum and on the site, I'll have my HUD file that you can download as well. And if you have Holdem Manager 2, you can still import Holdem Manager 1 files. There's usually a button that says import 1.0. That's what somebody asked here. Is it going to work for Holdem Manager 2? Yes. There's a button when you're setting up your HUD that says import 1.0, and you can import the 1.0 file, which I will provide you. Okay. So let me pull this in front and just talk about what these stats look like. Number of hands, obviously name number of hands. And one thing before what I'll say is this isn't the only way you can set up a HUD. Okay, this is the way I do it. It works for me. If you don't want to have all these, you want to rely more on the pop-up. If you don't like all these numbers in front of you, fine. If you want more numbers in front of you and you want to break it down even more, that's fine. The most important thing is that you know how to use the numbers, you know what you're looking for, and know how to exploit what you're seeing. So 2319 here, that's VPIP preflop raise. Those are the only numbers I really color code in terms of red, green, and yellow. It's just easier to see when multi-tabling. The rest I just think I just had random colors in there. I used to have a color for each line to make it easier. I probably should fix that before I make it available. So I apologize for that. But 2319 is VPIP preflop raise. That's another thing, guys, real quick. You might say, what the hell are you doing playing 2319? These stats, as you implement these strategies, will cause the strategies are going to cause your stats to increase. Most regs look like, actually there's no one at the table really with real reggy stats where it's 16, 14, 14, 12, whatever that might be. It's going to go up. Most of the guys that I'm working with are getting into the 21-18 range, 22-19, because you're being more aggressive, but it's timed aggression. But you'll see why in upcoming sessions. So if you're wondering why it's so high and that seems abnormal, it's for a reason. 27-39, that's cutoff race first, button race first is the 39. I want to see how wide players are starting to open as they approach late position. We all know as it approaches the cutoff, approaches the button, we're supposed to open wider because there's less people to go through and it's easier to steal the blinds. Fine. Some players open up wider than others. Some even really tight players will, try to take advantage of late position and be a 14-12 player, but then start opening up 40% on the button. Well, I want to know that. I want to know how wide are people looking to steal, and we'll use that in coordination typically with how tight they are, 3-betting stats. We can hopefully exploit those opens. 1461, small blind limp, small blind steal. 14 is the small blind limp, 61 is the small blind steal. Typically, you're going to find players that are on one or the other. They're going to be limping a lot or raising a lot. I probably have like a higher limping stat than most people would expect from your typical reg. And that's for a reason as well. I'll talk about that in session 3 where I actually do a little bit more limping in the small blind. I do it again for a reason against specific players, which I'll get into. But accordingly, if you're up against a player and you see that he has a very high limping stat, maybe it's 50%, you know that he's limping tons of hands and you can go ahead and raise him. And accordingly, if you see somebody that has a 61% or more steal from the small blind, they're obviously opening wide, but they're probably not calling that wide. So there's usually a nice gap there for some fold equity, and you can 3-bet them wider. So that's how we use those stats. 44, I keep saying I'm going to get rid of this in my HUD, and I probably should. It's the total steal stat. I really don't need it because I've got the specifics of the small blind, the cutoff, and the button. So 44 is total steal. You can have that in there if you want. Not really necessary. 77 is fold to steal. That's going to be a very important number that we'll talk about a lot. 9.2 is 3-bet versus steal. The question is, why do I have 3-bet versus steal and not total 3-bet? 3-bet is usually the more common one. I have 3-bet versus steal because, let me take this example, and I'm just kind of pulling this out of thin air. Let's say I open, we're at big blind 100, I'm under the gun with a 1500 stack, and I decide to raise with whatever hand. I decide to raise from under the gun. And a guy who is a reg, who has standard stats, through a full table, decides to 3-bet shove on me with his 15 big blind stack, facing my under the gun raise, and he's still got 4 or 5 players left act behind him. I don't really need to know what their total 3-betting stat is there to give him an average range of maybe like ace, queen, and pocket nines, or something like that. right? That's just an average range. Could be tighter, could be looser, of course. Um, but I don't need to know numbers to give them to be pretty accurate with a range. Um, with that being said, where players really start to deviate, especially regs will play very similar for the most part. But where many start to deviate is how wide they defend when they expect you to be stealing wide. When you're opening up from the cutoff, the button, the small blind, which are your standard stealing positions, um, how wide are they three betting you? And that's what I want to know. Some will defend, some won't. That's where I want to know who is going to defend and who isn't. Um, to understand, if somebody does three bet me, how wide or tight do I need to be calling or four betting them? Um, so typically, 10% or more is your really aggressive players. 7 to 8% is probably more on the average. 3, 4, 5% is certainly on the tighter side. So that's what I look for in the three bet versus steal. 61 is fold to three bet. It's a great number to have. To know, if somebody's folding a ton to a three bet, that's great. But you really need a large sample to get an accurate number here. So don't just say, oh, somebody's folding, uh, you know, whatever, 80% of the time, and it was just 4 out of 5 times or something like that. Um, so you need more than 5 hands of a sample to get that. So then I have C betting stats, fold to C bet and total C bet. You could replace that with aggression factor if you want. Um, but again, you need some more hands for this. But again, you see you didn't fold to a C bet in 5 times. You know what to expect there. So I'm kind of blowing through these because I'll be talking about them more as we go through in the specific hand histories. But this is what I have set up, and I've set it up for a very specific reason. These are spots I put in stats that are common situations that I can exploit, like folding to a steal, three betting versus a steal. There are small blind tendencies, there are late position tendencies, how they're defending when I open. Um, Now, another thing to just take note of is you always want to use your pop up to break it down in position, like fold versus steal. Sometimes players will have a significantly higher, let's say, small blind fold versus steal than they do in the big blind. Sometimes they like to defend more in the big blind. So it's nice to see, even though this might be a high number, to see the breakdown of what they're stealing from each position. And the same thing with three betting, for example. So use your pop up there to see what the breakdown is per position for those specific stats. All right, so that's the HUD. We'll be talking about the HUD and referencing the HUD as we go through and do more hand histories. I'm going to go through strategies and discuss the concept, and then I'm going to jump into hand histories to illustrate that concept. All right, so let me just go backwards for a second here, and that's to set us up for the hand histories. Okay, so we got our HUD set up. Oh, one other thing we can go in here. Here's something you can do if you want. The question was asked to me, do I filter the stats based upon number of players? There's 2 ways you can do it. You can base it upon number of players, which is fine. I think that's very helpful. I do think you should filter your stats because someone plays totally different at 15-30 than they do with 12 big blinds at 100-200. So I want to start seeing how their gameplay, how their stats change as the game goes on. And there's 2 ways to do that: either by number of players, the shorter the table, then maybe they get more aggressive, or by their stack size. I personally go for stack size. I know plenty of players do a number of players, which is perfectly fine. I have no problem with that. I chose stack size, and there are definitely some advantages and disadvantages of this. The advantages are that as you build a database of hands versus specific players, the regs, the guys you're seeing every day, you have history on them at all different blind levels and stack sizes. So that's a good thing. So you can get very specific about their tendencies, their stats at all stages of the game. On the flip side, again, guys that you don't have a ton of information against, if you're playing and you don't have a lot of hands, all of a sudden their stats might go to 0 or 1 because they might have hit a stack size that you don't have any history against them. So that's the disadvantage there, certainly. And the other disadvantage is sometimes the numbers can deceive people. Usually when players get down to 11, 10 big blinds. Yes, we know we need to shove wide in certain spots, but overall your HUD stats um, can start to show that you're getting tighter according to how this is set up. So as long as you know what players are capable of shoving in their ranges from different positions, like I know with 9 big blinds and a regs on the button or the small blind, they can be shoving ultra wide, 70, 80%, or into cards. So as long as you know that and don't necessarily see, oh, well, he's only playing 12, 10, so he must be shoving really tight. So this filter is a disadvantage if you're uncomfortable with that. But if you are, then that's fine. So what this is saying is, from 1 to 5 big blind stack, I want to see their stats from 1 to 5 big blinds. 6 and 7 are a little bit different. They're not totally desperate, but they're obviously in shoving mode. So I want to see their stats when they have stacks of 1 to 6 big blinds, 1 to 7. 8 to 12 big blind stacks. You're not desperate, but you're typically in push fold mode, or most people are. So I chose 11. I want to see what their stats are from 1 to 11 big blinds. And then after that, you're obviously not desperate, and you can typically play more of a game where you're just raising. So I want to include all of their stats. I want to include their whole gameplay. And when you first start a game, you're obviously going to see their overall stats. Then it obviously includes all of it, even the short stack. But most of your hands are played at the early stages, so that's what's really going to dominate those stats. So that is that. I can provide this picture file as well if you want. I'll provide that in the forum, or if you want to private message me, I can provide you a picture file, or you can just pause the screen and copy it. So that is that. In a previous bootcamp session, I talked about this. I'm actually probably going to create a separate little video specifically for using your database to find player tendencies. Because what you see here is that you filter for shoving ranges versus regs and note ranges. And what that means is that if you go into hands, I obviously have show marked hands. I'm going to keep that there for right now. But you can filter all of your hands based upon situations, 3-betting situations, all-in situations, and then you can do a player search for, let's say there's like 5 guys that just give you trouble every single day, and you want to see, okay, let's see if I can identify maybe what their calling ranges are, what their shoving ranges are. Are they 3-betting me wider? We can set up filters of our own database to get that information, and then what you do is you right click, you hit export all hands to hard drive, and next thing you know, you start developing these text files of hands against specific players, and that can be used later to replay them and start taking notes on players to get even more of an advantage. Again, like I said, the more information the better. The less guessing you have to do, the better. So I'm probably going to create a little bonus video to go on top of this with additional filters that you can use for your studying after you're done your sessions, when you're looking to get better and improve your own game. So I'll skip this part for right now and probably create a smaller video because I don't have it set up right now in terms of getting filters set up for your own database. All right. So let me just scroll down here a little bit just to keep up with the questions. I can see some questions here about no caddy. I'll talk about that in a second. We're not at a 15-minute break. I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, so here we are. Exploitive note-taking. So as I said before I started using the HUD, I really took tons of notes. But I actually used a very basic color coding system. It was like green for bad, fishy players. Purple was the wild card where they weren't losing, but they weren't winning, so they were kind of up and down. They probably had some leaks that I needed to identify. Orange was a winning reg, and red was like the best of the best. And that was fine. Just knowing if players are winning and losing players can really help you with ranges. But as you start getting into more of exploitable play and multi-tabling and being able to make these decisions very quickly, it's best to start color coding based upon tendencies that you can exploit. So, I mean, you can see it there. I'm not going to read through every single one, but a yellow player who is a reg who's really tight, who's not defending, those are actually the easiest players to play against. You can just race through them all day. So I want to know, do I have a bunch of yellow guys to my left? If so, I'm going to take advantage of that. It's easy. Green is a really aggressive, fishy player. Sometimes they're actually really difficult. They do all sorts of wacky stuff. The light blue is probably your least frequent of players that you're going to see. in terms of a tight fishy player. Um, you're typically going to find a loose passive fish. Um, Blue, purple, limp fold, limp call. Um, you're going to probably find players that have combinations of all of these. Pick one and go with it. Maybe pick one that's most important to you for that player, and then just take a note of the other stuff that they do. Like you might see a fishy player that defends, but they also, um, or that's really aggressive, but they're also limp calling. So you obviously can't label them green and purple, but I might just label them as really aggressive fishy player. And I'll note that if they limp, they're going to call your all in if you shove over top of them. Red is an aggressive reg. They three bet a lot potentially. We'll talk about them. And orange maybe just a good reg. Not tons of information. So use your own. I mean, you don't have to, again. You don't have to follow this. The most important thing is that you color code based upon tendencies that you can exploit. Have it very simple, but also be able to take notes. What you see. You see somebody shoves a particular hand you didn't expect them to. Take a note. Obviously, that might be a little bit difficult if you're mass tabling, and that's where I recommend NoCaddy. NoCaddy is a great program to integrate with your HUD. To get. I've only heard good things about NoCaddy, and in part 4 of this course, we're going to be talking about integrating the HUD and NoCaddy to play the most optimal game. That session is going to be done by Makti Sony. I'm really pumped for that. I know a lot of you guys are as well. So that's going to take this concept of exploiting to a whole new level. So I'm really excited for that. So with that being said, this is our break time that we had. I am going to pause the video here. I'm going to end the video here, and I'm going to create a new video for part 2 where we're going to jump right into one of the strategies that you can use right away in your games that's happening every single day, every single second probably that you're playing, that you can start taking advantage of right away. And it's a really, really profitable play, and it's probably the most common play that I recommend to players, especially even the most winning players. This is something that most are missing. So stay tuned for part 2 of session 1. Thanks, guys.